What's up, guys? Justin from the church here. Man, I'm glad to be with you. Excited for this little teaching. I want to start out with a quick question for you guys. Do you believe that every book in the Bible points to the gospel of Jesus Christ? Do you believe that every book of the Bible points to Jesus Christ? Do you think, are you able even to read some of these kind of obscure Old Testament things and see the gospel in that? You see, I preached just a couple of weeks ago and I said, man, that every book of the Bible from Genesis to Revelation is able to, all of it points to Jesus. All of it points to the gospel of Jesus Christ. It's all in there. It's all a part of the gospel. It's so important. So what I want to do here with this short little video is just show you what I mean, show you what it looks like to see the gospel in some of these Old Testament stories. And so we're going to be in a short little obscure story out of the book of Numbers. I've been reading through Numbers in my daily devotions and in just in my own time. And I came across this story and I thought, man, that's such an amazing picture of the gospel. And so Numbers 16, starting in verse 41, there's some backstory to this, but I want us to really just focus on what's happening in this story. And here's what it says. On the next day, all the congregation of the people of Israel grumbled against Moses and against Aaron, saying, "You have killed the people of the Lord." And when the congregation had assembled against Moses and against Aaron, they turned toward the tent of meeting, and behold, the cloud covered it, and the glory of the Lord appeared. And Moses and Aaron came to the front of the tent of meeting, and the Lord spoke to Moses, saying, "Get away from the midst of this congregation, that I may consume them in a moment." And they fell on their faces. And Moses said to Aaron, "Take your censer, put fire on it from off of the altar, and lay incense on it, and carry it quickly to the congregation, and make atonement for them. For the wrath has gone out from the Lord, the plague has begun." So Aaron took it, as Moses said, and ran into the midst of the assembly. And behold, the plague had already begun among the people. And he put on the incense, and he made atonement for the people, and he stood between the dead and the living, and the plague was stopped. Now, I want to point out just a couple of cool things out of this story, and hopefully point to the gospel. I think the first thing that we see in this story is that Aaron is a type of, he kind of represents in the Old Testament what Christ does for us in the gospel, right? It says he made atonement for the people. He ran out into the congregation of this rebellious people, and he made atonement for those people. It says he stood between the dead and the living. I love that. Is that not what Christ does for us? Stands between the dead and the living. It's in Romans says that we were dead in our trespasses and sins, right? And yet Christ comes and he stands between the dead and the living. He makes atonement. He takes us from dead people to living people. And I just love that picture of the gospel there in Numbers, that Aaron is this type of Christ to these people. And how much greater is Jesus for us to be able to not only just stand between the living and the dead, but to bring the dead to life through his sacrifice on the cross. What an amazing picture of the gospel. And I think another thing to note here is this rebellion. It says the congregation had assembled against Moses and against Aaron. See, these guys are angry at Moses and Aaron. They feel that in some way Moses and Aaron had wronged them, and so they were gonna confront them or whatever. And I think that this rebellion of this entire congregation of Israel is representative of us. It's representative of our rebellion, the rebellion that we had before Jesus Christ. The rebellion that we had before Jesus purchased us a new life on the cross. You see, we were those people. We were that rebellious people. We were the ones that had the plague of death. see, that rebellion represents us. And not only that, but that rebellion, I think, represents our enemies, right? It represents our enemies, those people that have gathered against the church of Jesus Christ. They've gathered against Christians. We see that so often in our culture today that just seems like everything is against Christianity. And this rebellion represents all of our enemies, all of those people who would gather against us and accuse us of wrongdoing. See, that rebellion represents us, but it also represents our enemies. But note this. Note the ferocious defense of God on behalf of Moses and Aaron. I love this. Just the defense that God gives Moses and Aaron. Look what he says. He says, the congregation had assembled against Moses and Aaron, and Moses and Aaron, they ran toward the tent of meeting, and then when they got there, the cloud of the Lord covered the tent of meeting, and the glory of the Lord appeared. And God said to Moses, "Get away from this congregation. Get away from this congregation, that I may consume them in a moment." I love that. I love the ferocious defense that God gives his servants. And note this, that is the defense that God gives you and me as sons and daughters of the Most High, right? That is the ferocious defense that God provides his people. You see, God isn't a passive God. He's not a God that's not going to come to our defense. He absolutely will come to our defense, and he's a strong God. He's our strong hand, our strong fortress that is for us and not against us. But then note this too, the ferocious wrath of God towards the rebellion. You see, God is not about rebellious people. And not only do we see the ferocious defense of the godly, but we see the ferocious wrath on behalf of the ungodly. You see, God, the plague, the wrath of God came out from before the cloud of glory, and it says that a plague broke out amidst the entire congregation. This plague, and in a moment, 14,700 people were struck dead with this plague. Like that is incredible. But note the absolute ferocity that God has against sin and against rebellion. But I think one of the greatest things that we can note here, and one of the biggest pictures of the gospel, is the way that Moses and Aaron respond. You see, God comes to their defense against this rebellious people. But what does Moses and Aaron do in this story? Look at what it says. God says, "Get away from the midst of this congregation, that I may consume them in a moment." And it says that Moses and Aaron fell on their faces, and that they devised this plan to make atonement for their enemies. And I love this picture of the gospel, and this charge, I think, to you and to I, is to come to the defense. You see, we have enemies gathered around the church at every side. We've got enemies and people who are against Christianity, people who are against us at every turn. And yet, I love the response that Moses and Aaron gets. They fall on their faces. They intercede on behalf of this rebellion. They pray for them. They approach God and they intercede. And this is what Jesus does on our behalf. But I think that this is also a call that he has given to us as Christians. You see, we need to have this type of mentality towards the people who are rebellious against God and his ways and his plan and his order. We need to be interceding for them on their behalf. That's our call in the gospel, right? That's our call in the gospel, is to stand in the gap between the church, the living church of God, and the culture which is dead and it's sinned. And we need to stand in that gap and intercede for them. We need to do our best to be for those who don't know that they can know Jesus. And so I wanted to share this with you guys. I came across this, like I said, in my Bible reading. I thought, man, what an amazing picture of the gospel and what an amazing charge for us. And I hope that as you begin to read your Bible, because I know that you're reading your Bible, and so as you begin to read, think about the gospel. Think about the implications of the gospel. Think about the ways in which you can kind of see Jesus working. See the ways that it represents you. See the ways that it represents Jesus. There's so many stories in the Bible. This is just one of hundreds that show us the gospel in the Old Testament. And so I wanted to encourage you guys with that. Thank you for taking the time to listen to me ramble about this story in Numbers, and I hope that you're blessed. We'll catch you next time.